Good afternoon, welcome to the UK Column Live. It's the 16th of January 2014. Myself, Louise Collins, Brian Garish and Mike Robinson here in Plymouth. And from our Bolton studios, we have Justin Walker from the BCG Group.
It's good, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really good.
This is some quite exciting progress in 2014. It's been nice to have Roger back on the programme, and we've had a very good response from his talk about the law and the courts and what's happening. And Justin, of course, will be talking a little bit later in the programme about money and in particular the Bradbury pound. So are you there, Justin, at the moment?
Hello, Lou, hello, Brian, hello, Mike. Yes, everything's fine and in the Bolton studio, and I'm very proud to be coming from the Bolton studio because I'm actually Bolton born and bred, so I'm coming from my hometown, which I'm very proud of.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much for that. Well, before we start our news today, as always, we're going to bring the UK Column supercomputer into play. We've inserted the barometric pressure. We've put in the wind direction. The barometer's been falling quite significantly. So this is giving us an X and Y reading. I'm telling the absolute truth because it's coming straight off this calculating disc. And that says that we're in for more heavy rain showers and or stormy weather. And looking out of the window and what's happened overnight, I think it's pretty accurate.
Okay.
So that's what we're forecasting here in Plymouth. Of course, it may be different where you are, but the likelihood of rain is pretty high. Well, we're going to start with an article or event which took place in 2010 involving a 12-year-old boy. But for a variety of reasons, this is now circulating on the internet. The original story we've got here in the Mirror and the Guardian, but boy of 12 hauled out of class by police over David Cameron Facebook protest. And the Guardian picked up on some other issues there. Police were sorry for questioning schoolboy over protests at David Cameron's office. We thought this was very interesting, this story was circulating, and we decided we were going to do some of the UK Column investigation into it. What is the story? A 12-year-old plans a protest at Cameron's constituency office to stop his youth club being shut down. And as you can see, this is now, or was, hitting the national papers. So what have they got to say on it? Well, this is some of the detail as part of the Condemn Cuts. Very interesting to see national press using the right language. The Condemn Party. Oxfordshire County Council is axing £4 million for funding for 20 youth clubs, including the one at the young boys' home village. And significant because these sorts of cuts, of course, this is what Cameron is all about. But here, the article gives us a clue as to what's going on because Oxfordshire County Council is saying that volunteers might take over as part of Mr Cameron's big society. So we have a government lying to the nation over the state of the money supply, saying we haven't got enough money for hospitals or roads or police or military or indeed youth clubs. And so what this is going to do is force young people onto the streets. And but don't worry because, well, the service might be provided by Saul Alinsky activists as part of Mr Cameron's big society. So what we're really saying is, as you look into this article, particularly with some hindsight, we can see what's really taking place. So the young lad got concerned and he set up a Facebook group called Save All UK Youth Centres. Remember, this lad is only 12 years old and he picked up 649 members, and eventually he set up his demonstration outside the Prime Minister's office in Witney. They were accompanied by 2 youth workers and the picket was watched. Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine.
All right, that's good.
Joking.
The picket was watched by 4 police officers on the other side of the street. So we've got a little group of youngsters with ages between 12 and 14, and we've got 4 police watching them from the other side of the street.
I've got a feeling that we did mention this.
Well,
I'm pretty sure we did mention the story.
Okay, that's fine, but you'll see where we've now put it. So here's the Guardian. They give us a bit more information because they spoke to the young lad, Nicky, And he said, in my lesson, the school secretary came and said my head of year wanted to talk to me. She was in her office with a police officer who wanted to talk to me about the protest. He said, if a riot breaks out, we will arrest you. And if anything happens, you will get arrested because you're the organiser. Now, remember, this is a police officer talking to a 12-year-old. The 12-year-old's mother wasn't present, so that this is the police at fault already. But the police said that, he said, even if I didn't turn up, I will be arrested. And he said that if David Cameron was that's in his office, his armed officers will be there. So if anything out of line happens, and then he stopped. But the inference is quite clear here, of course, that basically somebody could get shot. So these were anti-terrorist officers that took this young boy out of his class. Thames Valley Police. It's very, very interesting here. We're back into the subject of Thames Valley Police. So if we follow it through, eventually Thames Valley Police had to apologise. Now, look at the language. We have dedicated officers who work in partnership with all the schools in our area to make sure young people remain in education and in a safe learning environment. That's except when the police are threatening to shoot them. And on Tuesday, the 7th December, our schools officer for West Oxfordshire attended the school in Incham and spoke to a 12-year-old boy in the company of the pupil's head of year about a planned protest. This was not with the intention of dissuading him from organising it, but to obtain information regarding the protest to ensure his and others' safety. As with any demonstration, we always aim to facilitate a peaceful protest. Well, we'll just take the last comment first, which is, are they really talking about that in fracking?
Yeah, that's true.
Are the police facilitating peaceful protests? We don't think so. But what sort of questions were the police asking this 12-year-old boy? Have you been abroad to any Al-Qaeda training camps recently? Have any of your friends got automatic weapons? Are you intending to use plastic explosive? This is madness to some people, but what we're seeing are police officers who've clearly been reframed in their training process, and they are now starting to talk and act complete nonsense. So we'll bring this into focus if we just bring that back on screen, because of course we're dealing with Thames Valley Police. And here she is, Sarah Thornton, the Chief Constable of Thames Valley, and this is the police force that has refused to investigate serious sexual abuse at Oxford and Cherwell Valley College, even though there's now documentation where this police force is admitting that officers failed to record the crimes. We've got the paedophiles remaining at large, and the victims have received no assistance from the Conservative-led council, nor have any Cameron's local councillors helped victims. So in taking this particular article apart, we can see that we've got this situation of madness appearing in the police, but my goodness, David Cameron is clearly very frightened of something, and we'll come on to this. So Thames Valley Police, of course, made huge propaganda out of the fact that the paedophiles arrested under Operation Bullfinch were all Asian. They neglected to say anything about white men who youngsters were talking about, not only abusing them, but helping to run some of the rings. There was never any investigation into the reports from the victims about white men abusing youngsters at Oxford and Cherwell Valley College. And here you've picked up, Louise, this headline today from Peterborough.
Peterborough, child sex gang, 2 adults and 3 boys were yesterday convicted of rape and assault in a big shake-up on child sex gangs. The gang of Czech, Slovaks and Kurdish origin groomed vulnerable girls for a number of years. The reason I brought this one in, I mean, we know this is going on, but I've been speaking regularly, daily to Bill Maloney, and Bill is working seriously hard trying to bring to justice the people in this country who are involved in this act, and we're not hearing anything. Okay, we had the story.
These are the people at the top of the establishment.
Top of the establishment. Bill and the team and Pymash are putting themselves at huge risk, literally daily. And I just want to bring the attention of Bill Maloney and Pie Mash Films to everybody's attention. And, I know that they'll support, if you can support him by buying his films, having a look at the website, I know they'll be much appreciated.
Or making donations.
Or making donations via his website, because he's really putting himself out there to expose what's going on. I mean, it was thanks to him this article came out in the Express over the weekend, and we're going to be doing a lot more with Bill in the future. So it's going on. They're targeting foreigners and foreign nationals, to
take the heat off the white paedophiles at the top.
So we'll be doing a lot more with Bill in the forthcoming weeks. So Pie Mash Films, Bill Maloney.
So this is David Cameron's society, and of course this is how David Cameron likes to see himself. Some of the papers have been covering the Prime Minister doing a run along a stream. This is the sort of picture here, tough man, King David. This is an old picture, but it's the same event. And obviously they're trying to make him look like some sort of Royal Marine commando instead of the, in my Navy days, we would have called him a big girl's blouse. But of course, what's he trying to do? He's trying to put himself up against Putin. But our question is this, really. Why is David Cameron so afraid of 12-year-old boys? And what we think is going on here is because any common sense initiative, such as protecting youth clubs, can spread. Common sense can come back into this country very quickly. And King David's fear is that individuals will work together to stop his calculated destruction of Britain. So let's really analyse the personality of this man. He's a toff, he's very wealthy, he's had a very privileged upbringing. He's had senior Tory politicians saying, well, of course, we knew he was going to become Prime Minister, and his friends are in the very wealthy banking fraternity. But his politics are very, very dangerous, because we have said time and time again that the Conservatives have openly declared they're using Saul Alinsky community activism in order to reprogram Britain, transform Britain. And where is it heading? Well, we've brought in our cartoon. I think this was originally produced by for UK Column in about 2008. And what we're showing is that across the country we have this massive breakdown. We have bent politicians, we've got treason, corruption, quangos. The state is stealing children, it's breaking up families. We've got bent judiciary, that's all been in the press. Perverted sexual education, a massive attack on Christianity. And many people would say at the moment it's simply nonsense that we have unrestricted borders compounding the problem. But of course that's on the ground. Above the clouds there we've got all the organisations pulling the strings, the parties themselves, the BBC, Common Purpose. But I just highlight this. At the time we were trying to warn that there was a dictatorship coming in Britain, and we used a few Chinese troops. I'm sure the Chinese army haven't missed those men. But here we are, March of the Dictatorship, represented by the Chinese troops. Fascinating that Cameron has opened Britain's doors to communist China to start to build our power stations and invest in our banks. But of course, Mike, you've picked up that Mr. Cameron's regime is also looking at laws.
Right, so this was a speech given yesterday, I believe.
Just bring it on the screen.
Sorry, yes, thank you. That's a speech given by Richard Heaton. It comes under the heading of constitutional reform, and it was given to the Institute of Advanced Legal Studies. Now, Richard Heaton has been permanent secretary of the Cabinet Office since August 2012, and he's also first parliamentary counsel. So he's a lawyer. He started his career as a barrister, and he joined the Home Office as a legal advisor in 1991, and he's been a career civil servant ever since. Now, the permanent secretary is the head of the department, so he's responsible for leadership and governance in the Cabinet Office. And it's also the Cabinet Office's accounting officer, so he's responsible for financial propriety of the department. But anyway, getting on to the speech itself, Richard Heaton is arguing that common law is too hard for people to understand. It is, after all, based on common sense and a few simple principles. So way too difficult for most people to get. So instead, it would be a much better idea to have tens of thousands of statutes which all contradict each other, because that makes the law much easier and more accessible for everybody. He cites Jeremy Bentham, who, of course, famous for writing the book In Defense of Pederasty, and he's also the man that invented the idea of the panopticon, which called for criminals, the indigent and the retarded, along with their children, to be placed in jail cells equipped with machinery run by a central power source, and that central power source was in fact fueled by the prisoners' children playing on swings, merry-go-rounds and seesaws. So this was his idea of a good time. And of course the main door of the panopticon had a sign reading, "Had they been industrious when free, they need not have drudged here like slaves." So this is the kind of thinking of Bentham, and this is the man that's being presented as the expert on legal matters historically. So Richard Heaton cites Bentham, whose view of common law was that it should be called dog law. And really, this speech is designed to imply that common law is overly complicated, that codification makes things simpler, that statute is superior or somehow overrides common law, and that's how it should be. So I think, this, as I say, this comes under the heading, as you'll see there, under the policy heading of reforming the constitution and political system. It demonstrates absolutely the agenda of this regime, because you can't call it a government, because the government will be re-elected in 2015 no matter what, and it could be that Cameron comes back or it may not. Nonetheless, this guy will probably stay on his post, and the policy will remain no matter who forms the next government.
I think it's a good time actually to bring Justin in about now and see his thoughts. Justin, are you there?
Hello, yes, I am here. Yes, I'm just appalled by what I'm hearing. To me, common law reigns supreme. As far as I'm concerned, common law, common sense, and common decency and common humanity, these are the values that should prevail over anything any politician can dream up or banker. So I'm just appalled when I hear these things. And, sooner or later, these people are going to be arrested for treason, because it is treason what they're advocating.
Yeah. Well, we certainly agree with that. Interestingly, again, on the internet, some people were circulating a story. I think it was from one of the Telegraph reporters, but he was commenting on what Tony Blair had done to break down the social fabric of this country, and the fact that we now had groups of people who were divided against each other. And he does actually, I will make sure we report the article fully so people can see exactly what we're talking about. But that journalist was actually saying that this was treason. Well, we want to focus also not only on the government propaganda, but of course BBC propaganda when we're dealing with the constitution, issues of the courts and the law. We'd like to take people back to the arrest of the judge in Birkenhead. So we've got a picture of the screenshot here. It was a lovely sunny day, so don't be fooled by the umbrellas. They were just there to arouse interest in the general public. At least 600 people on the streets. That was the estimate by the police on the day. They take to the streets in a totally peaceful protest and arrest a judge in a way that the judge was not harmed in any way. But the protest was about corruption in Britain's courts. And remember, we've had these reports recently about the penetration of the police and indeed the court system, barristers, for example, by criminal gangs. So there were 600 people on the street. What did the BBC do? Well, it did not make mainstream news. It was reported by BBC Local News, and this is their report: judge arrest attempt by protesters in Birkenhead. And it says intruders have tried to arrest a judge after storming into a courtroom on Merseyside. Now, this is a complete fabrication of the truth. So let's see how the BBC works. Well, they reduced the number of people present from 600 to 300, and they completely failed to report the fact there was a spread of all ages and backgrounds. There were people who were 18, there were people who were 80, there were professionals, there were non-professionals, there were mothers, fathers, whatever. BBC simply ignores the whole thing. The BBC fails to report the scale of the police operation. The police said to us that some 38 vehicles were involved because they had to shut off a number of of roads. The BBC failed to interview any of those protesting to find out actually what their concerns were. The BBC failed to establish what the actual concerns were over corruption in the courts. They invented the storming of the courtroom, which I've mentioned, and also they selectively reported part of the leaflets that were handed out, thereby twisting information. And here we are, protest was not reported on BBC mainstream news. So when the public start to bring attention to the fact we know that our court system is being utterly corrupted by criminals working throughout the system, the BBC, of course, is the government's propaganda machinery. And you've identified here that the BBC now thinks it should pay itself some more money.
Yeah, pay itself some more money. Well, taxpayers' money, actually. And this is more for Mike to comment on. 2 billion pensions have been given to the BBC to top up the pensions. And Mike, I'd really like your thoughts on this story.
Well, the BBC, just like a lot of other private companies, has been stealing money out of the pension pot in order to divert into other places. Now, of course, that's not strictly true because the money wasn't in the pot for it to be removed. The key thing is that, of course, a lot of these companies are funding their pensions as they go, and this was an example of that. Very much like the government model, you fund the pension as you go. But if you don't fund the pension, if you divert the money elsewhere, then of course there isn't enough money to pay pensioners in the future, and that's really what this is about. They've got this big black hole. Just remember that, let's just say it again, £4.5 trillion is the black hole in the public sector pension pot, and that's why, Louise, anybody of our age and younger isn't going to get a pension no matter how much we've contributed in national insurance payments or tax over the years.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mike. Can I just mention that they're talking about the court in the chat room, and yes, Rusty and Malcolm did serve time in prison for innocent. They were innocent as far as I'm aware.
Of course, there were charges, framed charges, but the key point is that, interestingly enough, in prison, huge interest from the prison staff at what had taken place, and of course, it's well known within the prison system that, of course, much of the corruption is within the court system itself. This is another area that we hope to be exposing over the coming weeks and months. It's an important thing if we're going to sort the country out. So we're back on the police, and this is an extraordinary story from the Mail.
So you take your little baby out for a walk to get a bit of fresh air along a nice promenade, and the next thing you have a police van turn up with 2 police who jump out to question you about whether your child is cold or not. Well, this happened to Paula Andrews and her little girl Maddie when Paula, who is a nutritionist, took her little girl for a walk along Scarborough's promenade. A member of the public apparently phoned 999 because she was concerned that a mother was exposing their child to the cold. And a North Yorkshire police spokesman said yesterday, all reports concerning the safety of children are taken very seriously by North Yorkshire police and must be properly checked out. But an ex-policeman from that area, and he's a writer as well, Stephen Hayes, said the case typified what was wrong with modern policing these days.
Right. Now, if Mike, just hold that there for a couple of seconds. The second bit here, listen to what the ex-policeman says. This is by far the balmiest case. So here is a policeman. He thinks that what he's looking at is ridiculous. It's balmy. We're going to say, no, it's not. What you are seeing is the result of policemen and women being mentally reframed to follow an agenda which absolutely knocks common sense on its head. So if you're a serving policeman or woman and you're being taken into diversity courses, or you're being taken into management courses or leadership courses, or empowerment courses, what's actually happening is that you are being gently reframed to think in a different way. And of course, we're now starting to see policemen and women who are talking out about their colleagues expressing concerns.
I just want to put in this, Brian. He said, this ex-police officer said, in most areas it's easy to order a takeaway pizza and get it delivered than get a response to an emergency 999 call. So it's astonishing that when there is a swift response, it is a totally innocent lady playing with her baby.
Yeah. And of course, the inference is somebody makes one comment and the next minute social services have come in. And at our meeting last night, this UK column meeting, one of the topics that was coming up very strongly was the business that, of course, parents have absolutely no rights where their children are concerned. They only have responsibilities. So if you're living in Britain now, 2014, and you think as a parent, your child, your offspring is your offspring. No, it isn't. It belongs to David Cameron's state. The child belongs to the state.
It just gives me shivers down my spine. It's horrible.
Well, we're going to do something about it, but it's not only children at risk in this very vicious dictatorship which the cross-party cabal are building. We've also got vulnerable old people, of course.
This just it just reminds me of the whole John Cole story and his wife Maggie. At least the mainstream media paper is reporting, I suppose. A report yesterday, which was released by Care Quality Commission, showed that for 75 to 84-year-olds, there was an 81% on the number of deprivation of liberty safeguard applications made between 2009 and 2010. And back in 2012 and 2013, the numbers rose again. DOLS authorisations allow the use of restraints on people living in care homes or in hospitals who are deemed mentally incapable of making decisions, usually because of dementia. Examples include patients being physically restrained, chemical COSH medication being given against their will, staff having complete control over a patient's care or movements, and staff making decisions about a patient, including restricting access to visitors such as family and friends.
But you'd had a look at the Care Quality Commission,
I had a look at this group, who they are, and they are just bankers. The first guy, David Pryor, he's from Cambridge University, and he's got a law degree, qualified barrister, and he worked as an associate with Lehman Brothers and Lazard Frères in London and New York. Spent 15 years working as senior executive with British Steel, and he became chairman of Norfolk and Norwich University Hospital, and the list goes on, but completely banking orientated. And then we have David Behan, and he was from Blackburn. He was awarded a CBE in 2003. In 2004, he was awarded an honorary doctorate in law by Greenwich University. And he was actually the Director of Social Care, Local Government and Care Partnerships at the Department of Health, and the President of the Association of Directors of Social Services.
So what are they interested in?
So we've got banker and social services, yes.
And of course Lehman Brothers were the great bank favoured by political common purpose. Chief Executive Julia Middleton, in her book, she praises Lehman Brothers, says that these bankers were a fine example for young people. What actually happened to Lehman Brothers, Mike? I think they went out of business or something.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
What can you say?
So what more can we say? We recommend that children follow the role model of bankers. We know across the banking scene, fraud, corruption, lies, deceit, and a huge bubble of inflated debt. Nice model.
Isn't it?
Badgers.
OK, what a surprise. The government has now admitted that data may have significantly been exaggerated on the number of cattle infected with TB. This is after thousands of badgers were murdered. The mix-up is being blamed on IT system, and in this article they state the cost of the cull worked out at least 2.6 million, which equates to around £1,300 per badger. A DEFRA spokesman said the problems unearthed relate to data entry only, and it does not change the fact that every tool must be used to reduce the high level of TB.
Is this the same sort of DEFRA that was involved with foot and mouth, and we ended up with 10 million animals killed?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean, sorry, this is a good point, and of course you got to then say, are the Met Office predictions about global warming just a data entry issue?
Yes.
Well, I think what we are saying, Mike, is that we don't trust a word our government or its agencies say, so we'll see what happens. And for the Christians out there, you might like to pay attention to the fact that, of course, if you know your Bible, you will know that the tabernacle was partly constructed from badger skins. I'll let you think about that. Well, here we are, women wanting abortions.
Shocking. Ministers are now saying that new guidelines will see that women who are seeking abortions don't actually need legally to consult a doctor. They're saying that the destruction of a fetus will be downgraded to a trivial procedure. These new guidelines also suggest that it is not a legal requirement for doctors to give individual requests any consideration before approving an abortion.
Is this Agenda 21 population reduction?
Of course it is.
I don't know whether Mike like to comment on that, or maybe you'll do it later on.
Yeah.
Well, viewers of a weak disposition should turn away. This is not Tony Blair on this occasion.
Yeah. OK, now this headline is really deceiving because it reads as if Lord Bath, who owns the Longley estate, is concerned over fracking. But when you actually get into the body of the text, it reads completely different. Lord Bath is claiming the minerals under much of West Wiltshire, which according to Lord Bath is a right, as much of the land, minerals around West Wiltshire is his family's. Longley believe the interest of mineral rights has been in the ownership of the family for hundreds of years. Locals were sent letters informing them that Bath was registering the rights, and this sparked fears that Bath will now allow frackers into Wiltshire. Well, I sent it to Ian Arcraney and kind of agreed with my thoughts on it, that it was completely a scam article because it really does look as if Lord Bath is concerned. And I'd just like to report Ian is saying there has been a lock-on the Barton Moss Road. They have been moved on, and a convoy is now coming in with equipment to the fracking site. So any support up there for Ian would be very much appreciated. And we'll be speaking to him tomorrow, I think. OK,
we'll just add to that, of course, at the moment, UKIP has declared its support for fracking. So we've got a very interesting situation where the French ban fracking in France, and then we simply invite French, amongst other countries, into Britain to destroy Britain's environment. I think UKIP needs to start asking some very in-depth questions about what the leadership is directing. No doubt we'll get some emails as a result of that comment. Well, Mike, it's over to you and globalisation.
Yeah, so today saw the release of the World Economic Forum's Global Risks Report 2014. This is the 9th edition. And the top 10 risks are identified as, maybe we should do a countdown from 10 to 1, but I won't bother. Fiscal crises in key economies, structurally high unemployment, underemployment, and so on. You can read those for yourselves. So I just thought we would take a look at the top 3 and just have a look in a bit more detail. Because, of course, they're saying that if we look at these two for a start, fiscal crises, which of course refers to the activities of the banks, and structurally high unemployment stroke underemployment, well, those two are linked, so we'll have a look at them together. They're not the same, of course. I think we have to get the message across that finance and economy are not the same thing. Finance has an effect on the economy, of course. So we're seeing lots of headlines at the moment about the spectacular performance of the economy at present, but of course that's because the economy continues. People have to make a living. They don't stop working just because there's been a financial crisis, and making a living is really what economy is about. So the definition of a fiscal crisis, though, is a situation in which the value of financial institutions or assets drops rapidly. And when that happens, of course, there's a knock-on effect in the economy, and so fiscal crises in key economies is the top structural risk that the globe faces in 2014, according to World Economic Forum. Right, so let's move on here. Let's give a couple of examples. Here's an example: house price bubble being stoked. Expectations. That house prices are going to rise to a 14-year high, according to the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, and reported here by Reuters. Now, Mark Carney, is saying that this housing bubble is overstated. It's not really a bubble. And it's true that it's not the same type of debt bubble that we saw in 2008, but it is still a bubble. Carney makes this statement because, in fact, over half of house purchases are being paid for in cash, so they're not being paid for with mortgages at the moment. So you then got to ask the question, where in goodness name is all this cash coming from? And interestingly enough, on Radio 4's Today programme this morning, that question was specifically asked, and it was specifically not answered by the guest that they had on. But I think the answer is, we've mentioned this before, hedge funds are becoming landlords. When we mentioned it, we were discussing the fact that they were becoming landlords in the United States, but in fact they are also becoming landlords in the United Kingdom. And of course that pushes up demand and therefore prices of homes. That makes homes unaffordable for everyone else. Everyone that does need to get a mortgage is having to overextend themselves in order to do so. And it's also pushing up private rents as well. We've discussed that in the past because that's pushing people into housing association housing. And the question is, does any of us want to rent from a hedge fund? And does anybody think, Louise, do you think a hedge fund is going to be the kind of organisation that's going to sort out a damp problem quickly? Or
I don't think so, no.
So the financiers know that whoever's holding the bricks and mortar, when the crash comes, is going to be the last man standing, and they know that a crash is on its way. That's why it's top of the list. But we try to do anything about the banks, and the threats come. And here's one: we're going to, take our bonuses, let us keep our bonuses, or else is really what they're saying, or let us keep our bonuses, or we're going to close your bank account if we think you're too poor to have one, and we're going to charge everybody else. Yeah. And of course, the government, in the meantime, is totally supportive of the banks. Even the so-called opposition, like this joker, is doing nothing to sort out the risks. His suggestion for banking reform is to have more competition. And by competition, of course, what they mean is we'll allow you to switch your account to another member of the same cartel. It is just nonsense. So, we've got millions of people are either unemployed or they're underemployed as a result of the last financial crash. And of course, what does underemployment means? It means that you're either over qualified for the job that you're doing, or you can't get a full-time job. As in this case, we've got graduates doing shelf-stacking jobs. This is ridiculous in this day and age. And that's only, the situation we have at the moment is only the result of the last financial crash. The next financial crash, which is pretty close now, I think, is going to be 1,000,000 times worse. Now, if we look at the third significant risk, which was water crises, of course, again, government policy is not recognising that these are significant risks, because government policy, in fact, is removing funding from flood defences. Now, the World Economic Forum is arguing that there's two types of water crisis, where you've got too much water or where you've got too little water. Well, the government doesn't care when there's too much water. And they also don't seem to care that there's a possibility of too little water, because, as we keep banging on about fracking, but the fact of the matter is that millions of gallons of water are going to be taken out of the freshwater drinking water system, water that could be used for irrigation, going to be taken out of the system, diverted into fracking, and never mind the sort of potential pollution of the water table by fracking fluid and leaking wells. Obviously, once this water is used in the fracking process, it cannot be put back into the system. So they're removing fossil water out of the system, which cannot be replenished, and they're doing it in huge quantities. Now, in the conclusion of the report, it says that I'm just going to read a couple of bits of this. In exploring the global risks landscape for 2014, this report has highlighted the importance of several underlying themes in tackling global risks. Trust is necessary if stakeholders are to work together, and you need to listen to the language of this. If stakeholders are going to work together and tackle global risks, but trust is being undermined in some systemically important areas, then long-term thinking is a prerequisite for any approach to global risks. Collaborative multi-stakeholder action is required, as businesses, governments, or civil society alone do not have both the tools and the authority to tackle systemic risks. We hope that the mapping of global risks and their interconnections will provide a common base to better understand risks and their consequences, and for a dialogue as a first step towards collective action.
All the words.
And finally, global governance is the key to addressing global risks such as climate change or cybersecurity, but new models are urgently needed as the world's increasing multipolarity renders its current global governance structures unwieldy and outdated. Now, global governance and its implications for us has been the subject of a significant series of articles on the UK Column website, many of them written by, of course, Martin Edwards. I suggest everyone reads these articles, or as many of them as they can, get an understanding of what global governance means and what the implications are, and then go back and read the Global Risks Report. It's interesting reading, and perhaps if you've read some of Martin's articles, you might look at this report in a slightly different light.
Well,
Thanks, Mike.
This is where it all stems from. The more we go back and we look at the global policies, Agenda 21, of course, the United Nations, which is certainly not a benign organisation, we can see where the policy is coming that's now dribbling out of David Cameron's mouth. This is not coming from debate in Parliament. This is coming directly from the UN and stakeholders. Mike?
Yeah, look, there's a comment in the chat box really saying corporate nonsense. And of course, it's not corporate nonsense. It's very important to understand this is another language these people are using.
Yeah.
And it's a bit like the same way that legalese is a hidden language, and the bankers, the financial system uses a hidden language as well. This is another form of hidden language. We've got to try to understand it, and it's way more than just corporate nonsense.
I couldn't overstress this because, of course, when we're picking up people who are saying what they're seeing is rubbish and ridiculous and madness and nonsense, it absolutely isn't. We are seeing an agenda imposed, so we're seeing society broken down by what the government is doing. That is deliberate, it's calculated. If we read documents or we listen to the language of politicians, they are using, as Mike says, a specific language. So if you're a person now who is understanding what's happening in the country, I'm going to gently say it's our job to help other people to see what we see and to be able to really understand the language that's being used against us. Yeah. Which brings us on
to Justin. I think the clip we've got here of a great weekend we had, I think, a year and a half ago up at Stoke, and Justin was one of the speakers on the day. Just talking about events before we go over to Justin, can I remind everyone that I think it's March, is it? We've got Ian Crane's Alternative View 5 over a whole weekend. Friday, I believe it's Friday through till Monday, or it could be Saturday till Sunday. But go to ianrcrane.com to have a look at that, those dates and when the big event is. So, without further ado, over to Justin. Justin, you there?
Hello. Yes,
Hello.
I'm here. Yes. Well, I'd just like to make a quick comment, and I want to start off by being very, very optimistic about what's happening. Now, Brian, you mentioned when we first met, 8 years ago, something like that, we were telling people what's going on out there, but we couldn't see because it was like a submarine under the water. We can't see it. We know the submarine's there, but we just don't know quite where it is. But we've reached a stage now where not only the periscope is picking up above the water, but the whole bloody conning tower. I mean, people now are starting to wake up to all these different problems: money supply, child abuse, the legal system, the war on terror, health, it goes on. But I genuinely believe the saturation of truth into the ground, to use a sort of an analogy, which, I mean, down in the southwest, and you guys, you suffer from flooding and everything else, but there comes a point when the saturation reaches to such an extent you suddenly get a landslip, and the landslip just goes. And I genuinely believe that within 3 years, our mindset, which is the mindset of truth, of common humanity, common law, common sense, is going to be in power. I genuinely believe, because we represent 99.999999% of humanity. The other side, the corporate bosses and all the people, the bankers, they represent 0.00001%. They are an absolute minority, but not even 1%. And these guys must be really frightened now at the way the truth is coming out.
Well, thank you for going back to that analogy of the submarine. At the time, it was the best one I could put. It's an enemy there. It's unseen. You can't see it. Very dangerous. And to destroy the thing, you've got to be able to effectively detect it, know it's there. And yeah, that's exactly. We've got a subversive agenda which has been carried out over, in fact, many generations, but certainly across all the political parties, to destroy society and sovereignty in the nation state as we know it, and to install something particularly vicious and dirty under this form of fascist corporatism. So you have been doing a lot of work on the sort of money supply system and the Bradbury pound. I'll just bring up another shot from the UK column here, because this is particularly pertinent at the moment. We've got a video and a report of Roger Hayes challenging police on the basis of common law over an eviction. And highlighted there, top right, we've got the Bradbury pound, which you've been campaigning for. So you can start where you like, Justin, but tell us what's been happening around the Bradbury pound, and hopefully you'll take us, or you'll sort of finish on good news as to what this is actually offering for people in Britain.
Well, I'd just like to, before I do start, I'd just like to say well done to Roger yesterday. I was really impressed, because I know that Roger and Guy and others have been beavering away at the courts, and it was really great to see them go public now on what they've been doing. And this all fits in with what's happening. Now, on the money supply side, I mean, it was in September 2012 that I got that tip-off to start exploring the Bradbury. And of course, the more I have done, and bear in mind, I am not an economist. I freely admit I am not an economist. Common sense, I hope, drives me where I go, and I'm looking for the truth. And, at the end of the day, it is, if you like, the house of cards, this global financial elite, the system, as I call it, the system they've created is a house of cards. And the only thing keeping it up is by hoodwinking us into believing that we have to go to them to get the money. It's quite unbelievable. Every country in the world has an absolute sovereign right to issue its own money supply through the Treasury, and doesn't have to go near the central banks to meet the needs, happiness, of the people. I mean, it's just as I said, we have the examples of what's his name, President Lincoln and his greenback. But before that, we had the colonial scrip for the colonists. And then when you discover that Britain did it at the outbreak of the First World War, and this is the ironic part is that it was done to prevent a run on the banks, but to see the Treasury issuing, debt-free, interest-free money based on nothing more than the wealth of the nation. And it can be done again. And it's so interesting to hear how the politicians don't want to have a debate with us on this. In fact, a bit of stop press for you. David Pidcock, who's been advising me, he's been involved in researching money supply long before I came onto the scene, long before. And he happened to have an interview or a question and answer session he was attending where Nick Clegg, the Deputy Prime Minister, was. And he confronted Nick Clegg with the Bradbury, and his response was, I think the First World War is a slightly different situation than the one we have today. They have no answer to it. They'll say, we already do it. It's called quantitative easing or whatever. They have absolutely no answer to it, and it's brilliant. This is their Achilles heel. And I think along with the child abuse, which is coming out by the day, and with what Roger and Guy and others are doing in the courts to expose the system there, the money supply is a simple statement, historical precedent. We issued our own money before, we can do it again. So why are you standing in our way?
Justin, that's an excellent explanation you've given there. Just for newcomers to the subject, perhaps you just tell us in simple terms what it is that the Bradbury represents. Now, it of course is reality. The Bradbury existed, but just give us a few facts about the Bradbury itself. I believe you can even get them on Google if you go you can find them online if you search for them.
I think the value, the real notes is probably going up, because when I first looked up the Bradbury, the first thing I found out was the guy who created the Martian Chronicles. I mean, I wasn't doing... And then that rather nice, attractive lady who goes running around the place or walking around the place, she's called Bradbury. And eventually I found the Bradbury Notes. And then I found a very good book. And for any newcomers, I'm going to hold the book in front of the cameras. I hope this works. And it's The Financiers and the Nation. and it's written by Thomas Johnston. And I do earnestly recommend anybody coming into this to feed that title into the internet, onto a search engine, because you can actually find the book online. But if you can actually go on to Amazon or one of these things and feed it in, you'll probably be able to find this copy as well, which is a reprint done about 20 years ago. Now, Thomas Johnston was a Privy Councillor in the 1930s, and rare for a politician, he actually seems to be a jolly fine bloke. He is actually known as the father of the Scottish hydroelectric scheme. And he basically summed up what the bankers were doing at the outbreak of the First World War, that they had no money in the Bank of England. He claims there were only £9 million worth of gold in the Bank of England. There was going to be a complete run on the bank. So the bankers went trotting off to David Lloyd George, who was the treasurer, and said, look, can you do something to help? And I think they'd probably already worked out in their minds what they were going to do. Anyway, in the space of 3 or 4 days, they got an act through Parliament which authorised the Treasury, not the Bank of England, which, by the way, was the gold standard in those days, but the Bank of England, not the Treasury, could begin to issue paper money that the people would be happy to accept, because basically it was representing the wealth and credit of the nation. So they issued £1 notes and 10 shilling notes, or 50 pence in our language today. And when the bank holiday had been extended by 2 or 3 days, so when the people went to the banks to take their gold out, because obviously outbreak of First World War, there was a degree of uncertainty, so they didn't know quite how things were going to go, so they'd rather like to have the gold under the mattress, I suppose. And anyway, they were suddenly given these pieces of paper, and in fact they were only printed on one side. The initial batch of Bradburys were only printed on one side, and they were called Bradbury because Sir John Bradbury was the Secretary of the Treasury, and he put his signature to them, though later Bradburys had other signatures from other secretaries. So essentially, people were happy to accept these £1 notes and 10 shilling notes, and that ensured basically the cash flow for the outbreak of the war, because, mobilisation, it could have been disastrous to have had a complete financial collapse. But then everyone was happy with this, so they issued, I think, about 300 million or something like that in the first few months of the First World War. Everyone thought they were going to fight the war debt-free, essentially, because this is debt-free money. This is not interest-bearing, it's debt-free money. And anyway, the bankers suddenly realised, hang on a moment, we've had our bacon saved, but hang on, we can't make a killing out of the killing in the trenches and on the Western Front. This is no good. We can't make any money. We can't make any profits out of this. So they went running back to Lloyd George, and this is the fascinating bit. I'm still trying to work out why Lloyd George caved in so easily to their demands, but he agreed to go back to issuing war bonds and taking out loans from the bankers of 3.5%, 4.5%, 5% interest, whatever. And by the time the war ended, and you had the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, in 1914, the national debt was £650 million. At the finish of the First World War, and by 1919, the national debt had gone up to £7,600 million. And you can imagine then the bankers were rubbing their hands with glee because they've made huge profits from the First World War, as they did with the Second World War, as they do today from all the wars happening around the world. If we had no banking industry as it is at the moment, we would probably have no wars.
I think there's many people would agree with you on that. I think so. Louise's got a couple of questions.
Just what are the reactions of MPs when you talk about the problem, when people are going to their MPs and talking about it?
They try and ignore you. You have to keep badgering them to reply. The only replies I've really had, my own MP, Tim Farron, keeps telling me he's not an expert on money supply and he has no idea, and then refuses to answer any more of my questions and stuff. So we are going to be lobbying him very hard. As regards other MPs, well, I've got a letter here from the Treasury Select Committee, and of course we know about this. We approached the Treasury Select Committee, and I'll just read this out. Forgive me for reading it, but it says, "Dear Mr. Walker, thank you for your letter of 11th of April, this is last year, addressed to Mr. Andrew Tyree MP regarding the Bradbury pound. Your letter has been passed to me for reply, and I apologise for the time it has taken to get back to you." It was well over a month. I appreciate you taking the time to raise your ideas for reintroducing the Bradbury pound. However, the committee has a full programme at present. We are currently conducting inquiries into quantitative easing and macro-prudential tools, what the hell they are, among other matters. As such, the Treasury Committee has no plans to look into this subject in the foreseeable future. Similarly, the committee is unlikely to carry out an inquiry into the Bank for International Settlements. And I mention the Bank for International Settlements because everyone thinks that the Bank of England is answerable to the government. Like the Federal Reserve is answerable to the American government. No, they are not. They're answerable to the central bank for central banks. It's the Bank for International Settlements, and beyond that, you've got the key banking families. So this idea, central banks are effectively private banks, despite what they try and disguise themselves to be. But I'll just move on.
Sorry, Justin, just hold on 1 second, because I just wanted to add something to that. I've had quite a number of letters sent to me now from people that have approached their MPs, and what's basically happening is that every single letter that they're getting back from their MPs from right across the country, the response has all been written by Sajid Javid.
Yes, I saw that. Yes,
and actually, it is the subject of an article in this issue of the newspaper, which is imminent now. So I know everybody's highly suspicious about that because it's been so long coming, but it is actually pretty close to publication. So that issue will be covered in this issue of the newspaper.
That's brilliant, Mike. Well, I'm just going to round off this letter by saying, they say, thank you again for taking the trouble to write to the committee. I am sorry that I cannot provide a more positive response. Yours sincerely, Eldon Gallagher, and wait for this, committee assistant. So you can see just how important they consider the subject. And yet this is the crunch to the whole thing, because we know we've got bedroom tax, we've got student fees, going up and up. We've got defence cuts, the police, the vulnerable in our society. People like day centres are closing. Only yesterday, I was talking to somebody in the Lake District National Park, and one of the most popular tourist attractions is under threat, not necessarily from closure, but certainly big changes. So all the staff are worried because they know that there are cutbacks around the corner again. And you're hearing all the councils saying we've got to cut back so many hundreds of millions, and God knows. Everyone is living in fear. Nobody is feeling comfortable with life at the moment. And yet, if we had the Bradbury installed, because this country is valued at over £20 trillion, we could put a certain sizable chunk of money into the system, improve our infrastructure, to create jobs, to make people happy and industrious. We could look after the vulnerable, and we can look after our armed forces and our police forces, so that we know that we're living in a secure and lawful society. So we've got, the benefits are absolutely gigantic from the reintroduction of the Bradbury, and this is why the politicians, who some of them, not all of them, but some of them, are in bed with the bankers, because that's why they get nice jobs when they retire or kicked out of Parliament. But the majority of the MPs, I'm afraid, I would send white feathers to them, because I consider them to be cowards. They just can't be, they are scared. And this is where we've got to, if you like, frighten them even more into action, because we've got historical precedent. This is not some wacky conspiracy theory. This is historical precedent.
Yeah. Yeah. What about this MP, Rembrandtser?
No, it's...
Isn't it?
The Remembrancer, as opposed to
Remembrancer.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think we all know that the City of London is the engine house of the world's economy, as perceived by the global financial elite, or the system, as I call it. And there's no doubt about it that the City of London is the key, if you like. They have three centres. The elite have three centres. They have Washington, Washington, D.C., the Vatican, and, as I said, the City of London. And the City of London have managed to give themselves the right to have an individual sitting amongst the MPs who is, I suppose you describe it as a party whip on behalf of the City of London, to make sure MPs know if they are creating displeasure from the City of London, or they are upsetting people of influence in the City of London. So the remembrancer there is to guide, in inverted commas, MPs into ways that will help the City of London.
So it's a pure vested interest sitting all the time in Westminster through all the debates. The remembrancer sits there, and as you say, he's looking after the interests of the city. So some democratic system that is then.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is unbelievable. But this is, as I say, it's all there if you know where to look. But I've got good friends who I thought knew all about the City of London. They've never even heard about the Remembrancer. And yet it's there. They've got their own website if you know where to look. So, you know, we've got to get this year is the centenary of the Bradbury Pound. And this is the year when we can get everyone off their backsides to really take part in an effective campaign now to really bulldoze the Bradbury back into reality. I don't know if I've got time, but is it possible just to sort of give an idea of the sort of people we should be talking to about the Bradbury and who we should be approaching?
Justin, if I say if we take just 5 minutes to sum up, and we can always come back to this subject. So away you go.
Okay. Right. Well, we should be approaching everyone we can think of. I've got my list here, so I apologise if I look as I'm reading. But the military of all ranks, former military, the police all ranks, retired police officers, pensioners groups, trade unions at all levels. It's very important the trade unions wake up to this reality about the Bradbury. Students, well, as I mentioned before, university fees. There's no need for university fees if we had the Bradbury. All sections of the mainstream media, local, regional and national. And I work for a local newspaper. Trust me, if you start writing and talking to the editor and explaining the realities of the Bradbury and how wonderful, I mean, the national debt can be written off anyway by law because it's been arrived at by fraud. But, you know, the fact is all local services, their readers, in other words, and their listeners in the local media would be much happier because basically they're not going to have, they're going to have job security, they're going to, I mean, taxes, the taxation system is going to have to be looked at because, let's face it, the invasive, complex tax system that we have at the moment is designed deliberately to be so because they can hide a multitude of sins, but it's all about control. I mean, the elite want to control you, and one of the best ways to do that is through fear and taxation. So we need to get the local media on board on this. Bloggers and alternative media, charities, especially those who are tackling the effects of debt and poverty. Religious bodies, and I mean the current Archbishop of Canterbury, my namesake, I can't believe there's a Justin who is in the Holy See of Canterbury. But anyway, I have no ambitions in that front, thank goodness. But Justin has got to be approached, and Justin has got to be tackled, because surely a Christian would endorse the Bradbury Pound, because it would mean so much happiness to all the flock. The Women's Institute and other community-led bodies, local chambers of trade, small and medium-sized businesses, and finally, banking employees themselves. Do you know, I must have talked to over 200 banking employees, whether on the phone or going to see them over the last 3 years, and you know, not one of them knew what fractional reserve banking was. And of course, that is how the banks make their money. But the frontline staff have absolutely no idea.
Yeah.
Well, Justin, thank you for giving that summing up of all the things we can do. Certainly, we think that in 2014 and on into certainly 2015 beyond, we've got to really ramp this thing up. The politicians clearly terrified of mention of the Bradbury Pound because it is fact. And the other thing is that an introduction of a state currency issued as credit as opposed to a debt system fully supports all the local currencies where people want them. Just down the road, we've got the Totnes pound. There's been schemes set up in other cities. And of course, at the end of the day, Roger Hayes has also been looking at a wider system under what he's calling a lawful bank system. So we could remove this debt problem overnight, contrary to the lies poured out by George Osborne and his teams. We could get rid of the national debt overnight and start to restore sanity to this country. So,
and could I just say as well that this campaign will go side by side with Glass-Steagall, what Mike had talked about, you know, the separation of the High Street Bank from the casino banks. that too. So, I mean, we've got just a brilliant set of common sense proposals based on historical fact. So I want to see how these guys are going to stand up to us, because they won't. I can't wait to be on the Newsnight with Jeremy Paxman. I'm going to throw down the gauntlet now. I want to debate with Jeremy Paxman on this one.
Well, if you can't get it on Newsnight, maybe we could get Mr. Paxman into the UK Column Live studio. I think he would run scared of that. But thank you very much for joining us. Thank you to Alan and the rest of the team up there in the Bolton studio. We'll just end with a picture of the Bradbury from the UK Column website. And if you want more details or you want to download the ebook, visit www.ukcolumn.org.
And get your friends on there as well, and maybe get them to subscribe so we can start producing some more videos and films. Again, a big thought out there, and if everyone could keep Bill Maloney Pie Mash Films in their thought, and to Mr. Ian R. Crane, who is up camping, sitting on pavement, getting a cold bottom to stop these frackers getting in. So thoughts to them both.
Okay, well, that's it for today. We think there's some real progress being made. If you're at a loose end this afternoon, how about a few emails to your MP asking questions about the Bradbury Pound? We'll be back with you same time tomorrow.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.